Morning, Year 11s. Welcome to the Virtual Academy. Happy New Year. So today's lesson on the Virtual Academy, we are going to look at what was education like in Elizabethan England. So the new key topic, that question is, what was Elizabethan society like in the Age of Exploration from the years 1558 to 88? So that's going to be the main question for today's lesson, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So in today's lesson, we will be covering the following things. So what was education like during the Elizabethan era? What was leisure like? What were the main causes of poverty? How did the government, also the people, during the Elizabethan era, how did they respond to poverty? We're going to look at how Elizabeth and England, what kind of exploration and discovery did they do during that time and why it was important. And also, last but not least, the colonization of Virginia. So Britain's attempt to colonize, to take control over Virginia in America. So the tasks for today, all of you are going to go through the explanation of the PowerPoint, and you're going to complete the lesson assignment on the Google Classroom. So I'm going to attach the lesson, I'm going to attach the video, and I'm also going to attach the document that you need to complete on the Google Classroom. And you're going to use the lesson slides and the video to help you answer those questions on that document, okay? All right, perfect. Moving on. So today's lesson, what was education like in Elizabethan England? Moving on. So the key word for today's lesson is nobility. So Prince Harry is a member of the nobility. So what does the word nobility mean? Belonging to the upper class. Okay, so the nobility is the upper class in Britain. Children of nobility were tutored at home in subjects such as foreign languages, Greek, history, and philosophy. Okay, that is a history sentence. You're going to use your own sentence. You're going to write your own sentence using the word nobility. Okay, belonging to the upper class, or people that are from the upper class, the richest of the richest in the country. Moving on. So, what was education like in Elizabethan England? So, the number of children going to school increased during Elizabeth's reign. This tells us that it was a time of relative prosperity when some people at least had enough money to pay for their children's education. However, for the majority of people, education was a luxury, especially when worried about starvation, taxation, war, or disease. At times when the population was trying to survive, most people did not send their sons to school regularly. The type of education people received was determined by the social status. This is called a hierarchy, and it also was determined based on your gender. So more boys went to school in Britain than girls did at the time, because women and girls were expected to be housewives. So at that triangle right there is the hierarchy. It's a system that ranks people according to their status, according to their wealth, according to the power they have. So the nobility, the upper classes at the top. You've got the gentry just underneath. You've got the yeomanry. You have the tenant farmers, the landless, labouring poor, and then the vagrants, homeless, who are at the bottom, who are the lower working class. Okay, so this is the hierarchy, the triangle, and you know what that represents. Okay, a situation in which people are successful, usually financially. That's what prosperity means, all right? What were Elizabethan attitudes towards education? So attitudes were beginning to change, but still showed a divide between rich and poor. Education was not about talent and ambition. Education was about helping a person prepare for their life. They had no concept of social mobility. Most education would involve practical skills, maybe some literacy. Only a small percentage of children, especially boys, had any formal education at the time during Elizabethan era. New ideas and influences on education in England. So there was a new idea, and that was called humanism. Okay, we've covered humanism in the medicine course. So humanists believed that learning was important in its own right, not just for practical reasons. Renaissance ideas were spreading through England and Europe, including the idea that society could be improved through education and learning. Okay, we know how important education is in improving society, improving people, improving the life chances that people have in terms of the success, in terms of their careers. And the Renaissance ideas during the Elizabethan era also promoted this, that education was really, really important. Protestants believed that people should be able to read the Bible in their own language to develop their relationship with God. This encouraged more people to become more literate, to learn to read and write. So education became very, very important, and people were influenced, and they influenced themselves to to read, to learn how to write, to educate themselves so that they could read the Bible, so that they could read in school, and so that they can do the jobs and the careers that they wanted to do to prepare them for life, so that they can feed themselves and their families. As business and trade developed, education became more important, especially for people living in towns. For most people, education was limited according to their place in social hierarchy, and in rural areas, farming remained a way of life. Little had changed. Different types of education. So nobility, middle sorts of the nobility. Nobility. So so different types of education. So nobility, middling sorts and grammar schools, merchants and craftsmen, petty schools, schools for girls, labourers and poor children, education in universities. So this is the different types of education that took place in the Elizabethan era. Okay, education for the nobility. So children of the nobility learned a variety of subjects such as foreign languages, including Latin, Greek, history, philosophy, government, and theology. As Elizabeth I was highly educated in these subjects, many noble families ensured that their daughters were also educated this way, especially if they were rich and from the nobility. Girls of the nobility also learned a variety of skills, such as music, dancing, needlework, horse riding, and archery. Children of the nobility were tutored at home, both boys and girls, but separately from the age of around 7. Boys were taught to be skilled in horse riding, archery, also fencing, swimming, wrestling, and other sports that were fitting only for men. So some really good examples right there of male fitting sports, what boys did, especially in the nobility, what kind of sports they did. They did archery, horse riding, needlework, fencing. Okay, middle sorts and grammar schools. Have a look at that from the lesson slides that I'm going to be posting. Cool. So moving forwards, what did a normal, typical grammar school timetable look like? Right there in front of you is what it looked like. So make sure you look at that on the lesson slides and have a really good understanding of what it looks like for you to be a student in a typical grammar school. Where, grammar schools were mainly for the nobility, for the upper class, as they paid thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds to be educated in grammar schools. Moving on. Discipline and punishment in Elizabethan grammar schools. Okay, so teachers maintained discipline in the classroom. Outside the classroom, 2 boys were made monitors and had to report misbehaviour inside and outside school. Punishments included being kept in at break time, being expelled, being caned. Teachers monitored behaviour very closely, and also potentially being excluded from school as well. Okay, so being caned, physically caned, using a whip, using something very violent to inflict pain on a student if they had misbehaved, as a form of punishment to stop them doing that again, and also to warn others to not misbehave in school, as they knew the consequences. Merchants and craftsmen. So have a look at that from the lesson slides. What was it like for them in terms of education? Moving on. Petty schools. Petty schools were schools set up by and run in a teacher's home. Boys whose parents could afford to send them sent them to petty schools first. If boys did well at petty schools and were very bright, they can go to grammar schools. Punishments were very harsh at petty schools. Beating for poor behaviour or not doing well in lessons was very, very common for students. And teachers were given the authority and the right to do this in petty schools as well. Okay, really reinforcing the importance of education and discipline. Dame schools for schools and girls. Girls of all classes did not often go to school. Some girls went to dame schools. These provided basic education for girls. The girls went from being under the control of their fathers to their husbands. They weren't expected to support themselves. Wives and mothers needed skills such as cooking and baking, and they were taught this in dame schools. Labourers and poor children. So most Elizabethan boys and girls received no formal education. So not everyone had education or was provided education during that time. The majority of the population were farmers and labourers. They learned what they needed to learn from their families or working at home or in the farms. The impact of education. It was estimated that 30% of men and 10% of women were literate. And by the end of the Elizabethan reign in 1603, this is compared to 20% of men and 10% of women in the 1530s. So there was a massive increase. I wouldn't necessarily say there was a massive increase, but there was an increase. These statistics suggest that there was an improved education for boys during the Elizabethan era, but not for girls, unfortunately. Okay, during that time, girls were expected to be housewives, were expected to look after their children, and weren't really expected to be educated, to embark on careers like men did. And that's why there was more boys during that time more educated than girls were, because that's what society was like back then, even though Elizabeth was a very educated woman. Education universities. So for those who were able to go to higher education, Elizabethan England had two universities, Oxford and Cambridge. Unlike today, you would start university at 14 or 18. Okay, so 14 or 15 years of age, loads and loads of boys in particular went to Oxford and Cambridge from the nobility. The curriculum included geometry, music, astronomy, philosophy. The highest university qualification was a doctorate. Oxford and Cambridge universities were made of different colleges, many of which were founded by Tudor monarchs. Many lawyers trained at the inner courts in London instead of going to Oxford or Cambridge. Okay, so Oxford and Cambridge are the two most prestigious universities in Britain today, and it was established and created by Elizabeth. It's the inner courts of London. You've got Oxford University. These were all established by Elizabeth. Okay, to train as a lawyer, to study law, you had to they did it through the inner courts of London. All right, perfect. So that is the lesson completed and delivered. You have a lesson document that I want all of you to complete. I want you to answer all those questions on that document, and make sure you send it across to me by next Wednesday. I'm really looking forward to seeing your responses. Okay, just to summarize, education during the Elizabethan era was very important. Mainly boys were educated during that time than girls from the nobility. Not everyone had access to education. The lower class, the working class in particular, like farmers, labourers, vagabonds, didn't receive any education. They worked from home and they learnt from their families. But it was a cornerstone. It was a very important aspect of Elizabethan era life in Britain at the time, and it prepared them for life. It prepared them for their futures, education, and as time progressed, it became a very important thing that people needed to experience in their lives, and for them to do well in their lives, or for them to work hard in their lives, and mainly boys during that time had benefited from it. Have a lovely day, Year 11s. I look forward to seeing you very soon. And if you have any questions in regards to what education was like in Elizabethan England, please do not hesitate to get in contact with me. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye bye.